Welcome to the Witchy Work Wishes podcast, a place to find your weekly inspiration for bringing your personal witchcraft practice into your business, work, and office. Welcome back to Witchy Work Wishes, and hello, June. Last week we talked about potions, about teas and herbs and infused oils, moon water, and all of the little ways witches have historically worked magic into their everyday lives. And the more I sat with that episode afterwards, the more I realized there is a deeper conversation that we can have with it. Because eventually, when you start working with herbs and plants and natural ingredients long enough, you start asking bigger questions. Where does this knowledge come from? Why have witches always been so connected to the living world? Why do certain plants feel spiritual? Why do gardens feel magical? Why do thresholds and forests and twilight spaces feel different energetically? So originally I had my usual goal update episode planned for today. This is something I normally, personally, like to revisit every June, just to check in with myself and make sure I'm still on pace with the goals and intentions I set back in January. Kind of a mid-year reset moment before we slip into the second half of the year. I know I still need to do that for myself because life moves fast and it is super easy to wake up one day and just realize, I don't know, we've been kind of surviving the year instead of intentionally moving through it. But, meh. I just wasn't feeling pulled towards making a whole episode about goals right now, or at least not for today. And I know we've actually done some really good episodes around this topic in previous years. So if you are in a place where you need a little motivation and structure, a reset of types, or just a reminder to, reconnect with your bigger vision for the year, definitely go back and revisit those because the energy in them is still really solid and still really helpful. But this week, I don't know, I've just been feeling a little more connected. Maybe it's the season, right? Maybe it's May. Maybe it's all the work we've been doing lately around potions and moon water and kitchen witchcraft. All the little everyday magical practices. I don't know, but I just keep finding myself wanting to go deeper into the living world itself. The plants and gardens. The thresholds, the old paths. And the more I sat with it, the more I realized this was the conversation I actually wanted to have with all of you today. So here we are. But first, some housekeeping notes with Witchy Work Wishes. We are on episode 190 today, which means our big 200 episode celebration will be happening in the summer. Perfect timing, right? Summer has that full moon celebration energy. So I am cooking up some fun ways we can all toast to the big milestone. I'll say we also had our very first live Hearth and Hen Circle gathering last week, and oh my gosh, wow. That 40-minute time slot went really, really fast. Like really, really fast. I did not want it to end at all. So I don't know, maybe I need to look into the paid Zoom subscription so we can manage our time together a little better moving forward. Because when I was planning everything out, the free version with the 40-minute limit sounded perfectly reasonable. But once we were actually sitting together in conversation, laughing and sharing stories and talking about energy and life and all the things we do here together, it suddenly did not feel long enough at all. We were literally mid-sentence talking when it just shut off. And I'm so sorry, oh my gosh. But for our very first live gathering, I could not be happier. It felt cozy and genuine and open in exactly the way I had hoped Hearth and Hen would become. And for my ride or die girl, you know who you are. Thank you. Truly, thank you for your kind words, your encouragement, your openness, your honesty, and for helping inspire future topics and ideas for this podcast and our community. And for everyone listening right now, your likes and comments and messages, the reviews you leave, the shares you make, they mean so much to me, more than you probably even realize. Like I see them, I read them, I carry them with me. They affect me. And while I may sound confident overall, sometimes the truth is those little moments of support really do help me keep going. The 5-star ratings, the messages, the encouragement, the conversations, your support overall. It gives me motivation to keep creating and recording and sharing and building this space with all of you. So thank you. Truly, truly thank you. I am so incredibly grateful for every single one of you. So I am going to put together a little Q&A for our next circle gathering. We did the last one on Wednesday, which I love. That's kind of a big communication day. But I'm thinking maybe the weekend time slot might be easier for more people to join. Wednesday evening just might have been tough for a bunch of you. So be sure to comment on the June options so I can get the best times for all of us. Let's see, our animal spirit for June is the flamingo spirit with the message, embrace the in-between. I was not surprised when I pulled the card. I absolutely should have known it was coming. All of the signs were there asking me to get ready. So here we are. The energy is all about balance during transition, about learning how to stand gracefully in the middle space between what was and what's still becoming. One foot in the old version of ourselves, with one foot stepping towards something new, that new type of energy. And this in between space is not always comfortable. Instead of rushing through uncertainty or, trying to force all of the answers immediately, the flamingo spirit asks us to slow down enough to actually receive wisdom from the transition itself. There's also a huge creativity thread running through this month as well. Creativity, self expression, emotional balance, intuition, nervous system care, softness, visibility, confidence, reconnecting with joy again. It feels very aligned with summer energy beginning to open up all around us. So head over to Patreon. We will be diving deeply into all of it together with our monthly worksheet, journal prompts, exercises, tea, spell work, grimoire packet, all the good stuff, and all of the deeper magical layers that just come with our monthly spirit animal work. If you've been feeling a little emotionally, between worlds lately, this might be the exact energy your spirit has been needing. I've also been looking ahead to our just June episodes in general. After spending so much time in May talking about the triple goddess and feminine energy, it feels natural that June would pull us towards exploring the masculine energy next, especially with Father's Day coming up and the summer solstice and Litha arriving with all of that huge solar energy behind it. The strongest sun, the longest day, that very outward, active, protective fire type energy. And June also marks the 1-year anniversary of my father passing, which I know I've talked about a little bit in previous episodes. So I think all of these threads are just kind of weaving together right now in my mind, swirling around all at the same time. I originally started outlining something closer to like a Witch King type of episode, exploring masculine archetypes and sacred masculine energy. But the deeper I got into drafting it out, the more I found myself just getting stuck. And then naturally my thoughts shifted into being a mother of 2 boys and how complicated and emotional it can feel trying to raise kind, responsible, emotionally healthy men in a world that is very clearly redefining masculine energy in real time. What does strength look like now? What does leadership look like? Protection, partnership, vulnerability. And somewhere inside all of those thoughts, I got stuck again. So I'm not entirely sure what next week's episode is going to look like or become. Right now, I just have so many thoughts and emotions swirling around in my head. I am trying to organize them into one clear direction, but it feels very difficult at the moment. Anyways, I'm sitting with it, I'm processing it, and I'm trying to create something meaningful that helps all of us better understand and work with, maybe even heal some of the masculine energy that June naturally brings forward this time of year. Now, see, I know I posted a picture of the books I picked up a while back. I just finished reading The Crooked Path by Keldon. I loved it. He talks quite a bit throughout the book about the witch father and, witch king type energies, which feels like it ties right into the thread of the masculine energy themes I've been processing, getting ready for with June. So I have a feeling that that book is going to end up influencing next week's episode quite a bit as well, while I try to just glue all of my chaotic thoughts together for it. But the next book I am jumping into is The Poison Path Grimoire by Kobe Michael. And this one is leading me towards another upcoming June episode because I have waited a year and a day for something. Well, almost a year and a day. My father passed away on June 7th last year, and there are certain workings connected to events that happened afterwards that I have known deep down need to be done. And when I say known, like I mean to my core known. Some spell work and workings were already completed between July and August last summer. Things were done, energy was moved, but there are still one or two final steps remaining that I need to take in order to fully close the cycle. And those final workings are powerful enough that they made me stop and really think about the energy I would be setting into motion by completing them. I have always remained resolved in doing the work, but waiting a year and a day before moving forward with the final pieces may have been one of the wisest things I could have done. Because now, 12 months later, I can clearly see that this is no longer coming from raw grief, shock, sadness, or I don't know, some type of emotional reaction. That energy has settled. And yet, I am still resolved, still certain, still ready. So, for the upcoming episode, I obviously won't be sharing the exact workings, spells, or baneful magic involved. Some things are meant to stay private and protected. But I will absolutely be creating an episode around poison plant magic. Maybe we'll call it poison and baneful plant magic. But I'm still working on the title, still working out the thoughts and the details for our conversation. But keep an eye out for that one because it is definitely coming up too. Let's see, speaking of plant magic, our episode last week just lingered in my thoughts long enough that I wanted to keep the ideas flowing into this week too. I absolutely loved making the potion party episode. Like, I loved it. Oh, and guess what? Guess what? I actually reached out to Chelsea from Witchy Stitching, and she and I are going to co-host a real life potion party this fall. Like actual in-person live potion party. That is how much I loved the idea and the energy around that episode. Now, I know our family here is global, which is just super, super cool. But of course, I'm going to share all the information and invitations with everyone once we get things organized. Realistically, I know it will probably end up being more of a local event for people nearby, but still, like, I cannot wait to start planning it all out. I think it is going to be such a magical experience. Anyways, back to plant magic. The potion episode really got me thinking more deeply about the herbs and the plants that we work with in our magical practices. The teas, oils, infusions, our little bundles, the roots, flowers, all of the little plant allies that we bring into our homes and rituals all of the time. And from there, my thoughts naturally started drifting towards hedge work because hedge witchcraft is so deeply tied to plants, herbs, boundaries, spirit work, and the living energy of the natural world, too. And somehow, one thought simply led to another thought, and here we are. So grab your favorite tea, your journal, maybe a handful of herbs from your kitchen or garden, and settle in with me for a little while. We are going to talk about plants as living allies, the magic hidden in everyday herbs, the old pathways of hedge witchcraft, and the wonderful ways nature has always spoken to witches who are willing to listen. So get cozy and comfy because today we are stepping into the wild green world of plant and hedge witchcraft together. Plant witchcraft and hedge witchcraft are two very different things. They commingle a bunch of things, but they are different practices. A plant witch primarily works with the living world itself, the herbs and flowers and roots, the gardens and natural cycles all around us. A hedge witch, meanwhile, works with thresholds, the spaces between worlds, the spiritual hedge between the physical and unseen realms. And historically, these paths overlapped beautifully because many folk healers and witches worked with both plants and spirit. So I think talking about both today, and I promise to do my best with it, it's going to be really good because there really is a bunch of crossover. Now, normally, I do not like starting off with a bunch of don'ts, but if you are new to the area of witchcraft, these practices might sound a little overwhelming at first. So, for that reason, I am. I'm going to start right there. You do not need a giant, beautiful garden. You do not need shelves full of expensive herbs. You do not need to know the Latin names of every plant on earth. You do not need to live in a cottage in the woods, somewhere with vines hanging from the ceiling, with a beautiful black cat following you through the garden. I know I have said that before, and I know that is or may be a goal for many of us, but you don't need it right now. Plant witchcraft is not about any of those things. It is, though, about relationship. A hedge witch is more focused on liminal spaces, spirit work, and crossing between worlds. They work heavily with intuition, trances, ancestral work, folk magic, journeying, and the hedge, the quote unquote hedge, which is the space between the physical and spiritual realms. Now, historically, the hedge symbolized the boundary between the village and the wilderness, the known and unknown, mostly our physical and spiritual world. So the hedge witch metaphorically crosses the hedge. A hedge witch may work with dreams, spirits, twilight spaces, divination, and of course hedge writing or the journey work. But many hedge witches also work heavily with plants and herbs because herbalists, midwives, and healers often blended all of these practices together. And really, I think a lot of us are probably already doing pieces of this naturally without even knowing it. If you've ever brewed a cup of tea because you needed comfort, if you've ever felt calmer after watering your plants, if you've ever picked up flowers at the grocery store because your spirit needed a little softness, or if you've ever stood outside barefoot after a stressful day and just breathed in for a minute, congratulations. You've already stepped into the energy of plant witchcraft. At its core, plant witchcraft is about connection to the living world around us. It is about slowing down enough to notice that the earth is constantly speaking. Through seasons, gardens, through herbs, through trees, through growth cycles and decay cycles, through the smell of rosemary in your kitchen or lavender on your hands or mint steeping in hot water after a hard day. This kind of magic was incredibly normal for our ancestors. Witches and healers and herbal workers weren't always standing around giant cauldrons casting dramatic movie spells. I talked about this last week with our potion party episode. Most of the time, they were working with very practical things, everyday things. The plants growing outside the door, the herbs hanging in the kitchen, the roots and flowers and leaves available during whatever season they happen to be living through. That's really one of the reasons I just love this path so much. We have all of these don'ts that I started off with for a reason, because it really does not need to be complicated. A grocery store bundle of rosemary can still carry protection energy. A tiny little aloe plant sitting near your desk, yeah, it counts. The chamomile tea made with intention counts. A little basil plant struggling on your kitchen windowsill, it still counts. This path is not about aesthetic perfection. I know that is hard when, the visual side of our social media makes it look that way. Plant witchcraft is about learning to build a relationship with the living world again. And then, hedge witchcraft is about using those relationships to play in the in-between spaces. Let's start with plants as living energies and the plant witchcraft area first. Because once we move beyond, what does this herb or plant mean, and start asking, what does it feel like? Well, that's when our practices grow. Throughout history and within many, many cultures all over the world, our ancestors believed plants were not just objects sitting around decorating the earth. They were thought of as living beings, living energies and spirits. They had personalities, they had rhythms and preferences, they had cycles and presence. They had a big, big presence. And this is where we start brushing up against the idea of animism a little bit. The belief that the natural world itself is alive and filled with spirit, that rivers have energy, forests have energy, Stones hold memory. And plants absolutely have their own presence too. Now, whether someone listening takes that, very spiritually or very literally, or I don't know, maybe more symbolically, I don't think it really matters. The relationship is still real. It's still yours. I think most of us have experienced this, even if we didn't have a language for it yet. I'm sure you felt it. You know how sometimes you walk into a garden and it feels peaceful immediately? Or you sit under one specific tree and just feel calmer? I don't know, or maybe you keep buying the same plant over and over again without even realizing it. One herb keeps showing up more than likely in your life consistently. Well, that's relationship. And we tend to notice those things, don't we? We, as witches, notice patterns in attraction and energy. Some people are deeply drawn to rosemary, others maybe lavender. Maybe you really like thorny plants or wild plants, vines, moss, roses, sunflowers. Maybe you love ivy. We all seem to have certain plants that almost speak our language energetically. And then there's the opposite too. Some plants thrive around certain people and completely refuse to grow for others. Isn't that fascinating? You can give two people the exact same plant, exact same, care instructions, exact same sunlight, and one turns into a magical jungle queen while the other looks personally offended to be alive. I swear plants have opinions. I really do. And the more time you spend around them, the more you start noticing personalities. Some feel soft and comforting. Some feel protective. Some feel chaotic. Some feel grounding. And then some feel ancient and wise. I've even had some feel very delicate and shy. Plant witchcraft becomes less about memorizing correspondences and more about building relationships through observation. I think that's why so many of us talk to our plants. Maybe not all of us, but I think most of us do, right? And I know for some people that's going to sound really silly at first. But if you think about it, it's not. We speak to our pets, we speak kindly to our children, we speak gently during rituals. Words carry energy, attention carries energy. So when witches speak to plants, thank them, sing while gardening, or, whisper little blessings while tending to our herbs, we are building connection. And that connection matters. Even simple things become sacred through intention. Thanking herbs before harvesting them, leaving offerings in the garden, pouring moon water into the soil, lighting a candle near seedlings, or touching a plant gently before clipping it and only taking what's needed. That kind of mindfulness changes the relationship entirely. I think seasonal awareness becomes part of this too. Plant witchcraft teaches us to notice cycles again. Not just the moon phases, although, yes, absolutely those too. A lot of witches plant during certain moon phases, harvesting under full moons or working with the waning moon energy for pruning and release work, but also just the cycles of the earth itself. What blooms in spring? What dies back in autumn? What survives during winter? And what unexpectedly returns? Plants remind us constantly that rest is not failure and dormancy is not death. And really, growth is rarely linear. My backyard has become one of my greatest teachers for this with me right now. Between the chickens wandering around, the garden spaces, sitting by the fire pit at night, watching what grows naturally and what struggles, the weeds. Oh my gosh, the many, many, many weeds. I've really started noticing how different spaces hold completely different energy. Some corners of the yard feel creative, some feel restful, some feel protective, some feel emotionally heavy until they're cleaned or refreshed. And of course, certain plants absolutely respond differently depending on what's happening around them. I think when we start paying attention like this, we stop seeing nature as just background decoration and start realizing that we are actually part of the ecosystem too. Not separate from it, like really a part of it. Now, this next part is where we start stepping into the older roots of all of this, because plant witchcraft did not come out of nowhere. This relationship between witches and plants goes back centuries. And for most of history, witches were deeply connected to plants because we had to be. Long before modern pharmacies and quick trips to the grocery store, our ancestors relied on the natural world for almost everything. healing, cooking, protection, sleep, childbirth, grief support, cleansing, energy, illness, celebration, death rites, seasonal rites. Plants were their medicine cabinets and also their spiritual tools. Plants were survival, like to the core, they were survival. And the people who understood plants became incredibly important in their communities. This is where we, start seeing the village herbalist and the healers, the wise women, the midwives and the folk practitioners. The people who knew which tea could calm a fever, which herbs soothed the stomach, which smoke helped cleanse a sick room, which flowers were tied to love, mourning, protection, fertility, or even safe travels. I think a lot of what we call witchcraft, or what we now call witchcraft at least, was once simply practical knowledge passed from person to person, like generation to generation. Kitchen to garden, garden to forest, whatever it was. I think that's part of why plant witchcraft still feels so just emotionally powerful for many of us today. Somewhere deep down, it feels familiar, even if we can't explain why. It was very practical magic. Hanging rosemary by the doorway for protection, or putting lavender in pillows for sleep, brewing mint for digestion, using thyme in cleansing bundles, steeping chamomile to calm the nerves after a hard day, working with nettle for nourishment and strength, or using rose for both beauty and emotional healing, and working with mugwort for dreams, intuition, spirit work, and protection. These plants all carried stories, and they still do. Rosemary, especially, has such a long magical history tied to remembrance, protection, purification, and ancestral connection. Lavender became connected to peace and cleansing and calming energy. Mint has long been tied to prosperity, freshness, and communication. Chamomile is associated with comfort and luck and more of a gentle healing. In mugwort, our muggy mug has a very old witchy reputation, doesn't it? That plant has been connected to dream work, spirit communication, intuition, protection during travel, moon magic, and hedge crossing practices for a very, very long time. It is one of those plants that just feels ancient the second you start researching it. And what's interesting is many of these herbs existed in both the practical world and the magical world all at the same time. There wasn't always this hard separation between medicine and magic the way we tend to create now. For our ancestors, caring for the body, caring for the spirit, caring for our homes, were often intertwined. The same woman making herbal tea for a cough might also whisper a blessing while stirring it. The same herbs hanging in the kitchen for cooking might also be there for protection. The same garden feeding the household might also be part of a spiritual practice. It's super easy to forget how ordinary a lot of old magic really, really was. It lived in the kitchens, in the gardens and fireplaces. It lived right on the windowsills, right? Bread dough, teacups, laundry lines, soup pots. It lived in everyday life. That's also one of the reasons witches and plants became so connected historically. Plants were just accessible. They were local. They were part of daily survival. I think people who understood them held knowledge that was just incredibly valuable, which also unfortunately made herbal workers, healers, and midwives targets during periods of fear and persecution. Knowledge itself became threatening, especially knowledge held by women, especially intuitive knowledge held by women, generational knowledge, natural knowledge, really. And yet, despite all of that, these traditions survived, right? Through recipes and folklore, through family practices and those beautiful handwritten notes tucked into cookbooks, through soups made the way our grandmothers used to make them, through gardens planted from saved seeds. And now here we are today, like still talking to rosemary, still drying herbs in our kitchen and making soup when someone we love is hurting, still feeling comforted when lavender and chamomile hit the air. That thread, that web, it never fully disappeared. Also, it's probably why plant witchcraft feels so grounding to so many of us right now. We're in a world that moves incredibly fast. This path asks us to slow down and remember the old ways of relating to the earth again. Okay, not a super side note, but kind of a side note. Real quick, I wanted to mention the little blue flower that quietly held so much symbolism throughout the Outlander story. I don't know if you guys have been watching it, but the Outlander started with and ended with the Forget Me Not. And don't worry, I'm not going to give anything away if you have not yet watched it. But with this beautiful series finally coming to an end, it feels fitting to pause for just a quick second and talk about the plant itself, because this is such a perfect example of how plants carry story, emotion, symbolism, and energy all at the same time. And yes, I did watch the whole series and I just loved it. The forget me not is this tiny, delicate blue flower that really does feel magical the second you look at it. It's small, it's gentle, but it is super easy to overlook if you are not paying attention. Historically and symbolically, though, this flower carries enormous emotional weight. For centuries, forget me nots have been associated with memory and devotion, enduring love, connection across distance, and remembrance after separation or death. Even the name itself feels like a spell, doesn't it? Forget me not. Like a plea or promise, like a thread in our web just refusing to break. I think that's part of what makes this plant lore so fascinating. Humans have always attached emotion and meaning to plants, right? We tell stories through them, we mourn through them, we celebrate through them, and we remember. We really remember through them. Different flowers became or become symbols for things that we sometimes struggle to say out loud. And the forget me not, especially, became tied to the idea that love, memory, and connection can survive distance, hardship, time, and even loss. It's the idea that energy leaves an imprint and connection can linger. That love travels and memory itself is sacred. And visually, these flowers feel a little dreamlike, don't they? That soft blue color has long been associated with emotion, intuition, spirit, longing, and depth. Blue flowers in folklore often carry this sort of liminal, almost mystical energy to them because naturally occurring true blue flowers are actually somewhat rare in nature. So when they do appear, they stand out. The forget me not also has roots in old European folklore and romantic legends. There are stories of lovers exchanging them before separation, stories of knights gathering the flowers near rivers. There are stories connecting them to loyalty beyond death. And whether historically accurate or maybe they are softened over generations through storytelling, the emotional symbolism stayed. Now, that's how plant magic survives through story. Not necessarily because every single tale is historically perfect, but because humans keep emotionally feeding meaning into the plant over generations. The symbolism becomes alive because people continue carrying it forward. It's folk magic, really, isn't it? It's the old ways. And I think Outlander used that symbolism beautifully because the forget me not represents something that so many of us understand deeply: the fear of losing connection and the raw desire to be remembered. We want to believe that love can survive impossible distances. And we know, or have a general understanding, that some bonds really do leave permanent marks on the soul. For such a tiny little flower, it really does carry a tremendous amount of emotional magic. So, well done, Outlander. Like, well done. The blue forget me not started the series off and ended the series with, I think, most of us, which is just saying, oh my goodness. Okay, let's step into the myths a little bit. Because if plant witchcraft feels earthy and rooted, hedge witchcraft feels like standing at the edge of the forest at twilight, not fully in one world, not fully in the other world, just right in between. And the word hedge itself is incredibly important here. Historically, the hedge was actually a literal boundary, a living border between the safety of the village and the unknown wild beyond it. One side had homes and farmland and structures, rules, routines, and just our everyday life. And the other side, well, it was the forest and spirits, mystery and darkness, the unknown. The hedge marked the crossing point between worlds. And a hedge witch was often thought of as someone who spiritually worked that boundary, someone willing to walk between the seen and unseen. I think at its core, hedge witchcraft is deeply, deeply intuitive, deeply spiritual, and really deeply personal. It's about being comfortable sitting in liminal spaces. And liminal space itself is such a beautiful concept. It's the in between, twilight, dawn, doorways, crossroads, thresholds, dream states. It's the quiet moment before sleep, the feeling of standing between who you were and who you're becoming. Hedge witches have historically been associated with these in between spaces because they were believed to move energetically between worlds through trance and dreams, intuition, spirit communication, meditation, ritual, and journey work. Sometimes this was connected to folk healing, sometimes ancestral practices and spirit communication. Sometimes I think it was just connected to deep intuitive work and dream travel. And depending on the culture, of course, the region and the time period, these practices looked very different. But the common thread with everyone, or all of them, was usually that the hedge witch was someone willing to listen beyond ordinary noise. Someone who trusted intuition and worked closely with symbols and cycles, dreams, signs, spirits, ancestors, and really altered states of awareness. I think many modern witches experience little pieces of this naturally. Again, almost like with our plant stuff without even realizing it. You might not call yourself a hedge witch, but have you ever had a dream that just felt different somehow? Like it lingered in your bones all day? Have you ever walked outside at dusk and suddenly felt incredibly aware, like the air itself shifted? Maybe you've sat quietly by a fire pit, staring into the flames, and almost slipped into a meditative state without knowing or trying. That sort of energy, that softened edge between worlds energy, that's the atmosphere hedge witchcraft often lives inside. There's usually a slower feeling to it, a quieter feeling for sure, less performative and aesthetic, and more listening type energy. A hedge witch often works alone, or did, I guess, historically, not necessarily because they didn't like people, but because solitude creates stillness. And stillness allows us to notice things we normally miss: the sound of wind changing, animal behavior, dream patterns, our gut feelings, little ancestral nudges or emotional shifts, moon cycles, synchronicities. Hedge witchcraft tends to ask us to slow down enough to actually hear ourselves again. And ancestors can become a beautiful part of this path too. Often this is going to be through, memory, intuition, and the amazing family recipes. It's going to be through our inherited traditions, photographs, heirlooms, repeated signs and dreams, and, the emotional connections. Sometimes ancestor work is simply sitting with the awareness that countless people came before us, survived before us, loved before us, and left pieces of themselves woven into the web of who we are right now. And that awareness alone really feels incredibly sacred, doesn't it? Crossroads are another important symbol here, too. Crossroads appear constantly in magical traditions across the world because they represent choice, transition, possibility, uncertainty, and really movement between paths. Again, liminal energy, right? Neither here nor there, rather both at once. I think that's why hedge witchcraft resonates so strongly with people who are going through transitions in life, whatever that transition is: career change, grief, spiritual awakening. That'll do it. Motherhood will do it. Menopause will do it. Trauma, healing, identity shifts, relationship endings, big personal transformations will do it. Because hedge work acknowledges that becoming something new often requires walking through the unknown for a while. And I don't even want to say, like, hey, it's just part of the process, because there's something deeply magical about learning not to fear that space, to sit at the edge of the forest instead of running from it, to let mystery exist without needing to control every piece of it. That's the heart of hedge witchcraft, just not escaping the world, but learning how to stand between worlds long enough to hear the wisdom that's just whispering back. I think most hedge work is pretty quiet. And really, depending on where you are, with your own journey with it, it can be incredibly simple. Meditation, visualization, dream journaling, or sitting quietly outside at dusk, taking intuitive walks even without headphones on, watching birds, listening to the wind, paying attention to recurring symbols, feeling emotionally connected to moon cycles and noticing when a space feels off, just off, or just comforting. Connecting with family history, lighting a candle and speaking to our ancestors, or sitting in silence long enough just to hear your own inner voice again. That counts too. You do not need big, intense rituals to begin connecting spiritually. You really don't. I think some of the deepest spiritual moments people experience happen during very ordinary moments like standing barefoot in the garden, or driving alone at sunrise, or walking through fog. Those moments matter. Human beings actually are naturally very intuitive. For most of history, we lived much closer to the rhythms of nature. We noticed weather shifts and animal movement and seasonal cycles, changes in light, dawn, dusk, silence, the emotional feeling of certain places. And hedge witchcraft invites us back into that awareness. Now, if you are farther along with working in this area, hedge traveling might look a little different. I think for many experienced hedge witches, traveling can look like entering a deeply meditative or trance like state in order to connect with ancestors, seek guidance, explore symbols or visions, receive intuitive insight, work with spirit allies or archetypes, process grief, healing, or transformation, enter dreamlike inner landscapes, and deepen spiritual awareness. The important thing is that most modern hedge witches are not talking about physically leaving the body in some movie style way. It really is much closer to deep meditation, guided visualization, lucid dreaming, trance work, or intentional inner journeying. I think a lot of people have brushed up against mild forms of this pretty naturally. Those moments where you're just deeply relaxed before sleep and vivid imagery appears? Or you have music playing, there's drumming, rain maybe, or just some type of repetitive movement that shifts your awareness. Could be through meditation and when you feel that strong symbolic inner experience. Even dreams feel emotionally or spiritually significant for a lot of hedge witches. That altered awareness is often the doorway hedge witches work within. And they get there in different ways: rhythmic drumming, chanting, breath work, herbs, darkness, candlelight, fasting sometimes, repetitive movement, prayer, or even just deep silence to help enter those states. For the experienced practitioners, traveling is less about escape and more about intentional spiritual listening. Hedge witches usually develop these practices slowly over the years through trust and observation and grounding, a lot of grounding. The foundation is almost always emotional awareness, though, some type of intuition and patience, and relationship with the natural world first. Honestly, I think just a lot of hedge wisdom is simply learning how to sit quietly enough and for long enough to hear yourself and the world around you more clearly. Most people can sense this instinctively, even if they don't use spiritual language for it. Many magical traditions throughout history believe the veil, that symbolic boundary between worlds, felt thinner during certain times. We've talked about this before. Twilight, Samhain, the dark moon, storms, seasonal transitions, and those moments of transformation. Again, liminal spaces, that in between energy. It shows up everywhere in hedge work. And just know a hedge crossing does not always mean leaving reality. Like sometimes it simply means becoming deeply present. Present enough to notice your intuition and hear emotional truth and just sit with the mystery a little bit instead of constantly distracting yourself from it. Dream work is a beautiful place for beginners to start, and I'm certainly not saying I'm not a beginner, but dream work is just a wonderful way to begin. And not because every dream is some giant prophecy, right? But because dreams bypass the logical mind just a little bit. They speak through symbols, emotions, memory, archetypes, our fears, and intuition. So keeping a dream journal can become a great form of hedge work all by itself. Same with intuitive walks, really. If you're looking to start somewhere, a great way to reconnect spiritually is just wandering slowly outside without a destination. No podcast on, no scrolling, no noise, and no rushing. Taking your time and just observing what animals appear, what plants stand out, what colors keep repeating, what emotions come up, what feelings are comforting, and maybe what feels heavy. Just notice it. What catches your attention for no obvious reason? That might not be deep hedge work per se, but listening is its own magical practice too. All right, so why talk about plant witchcraft and hedge witchcraft together? Like, why today? Why are we talking about this instead of checking on our 2026 goals like I thought we would be? Well, my mood certainly dictated a big part of the detour today. The ending of Outlander and the magical blue forget-me-not flowers influenced things for sure. But really, because plant witchcraft and hedge witchcraft kind of hold hands, don't they? Like a little bit. Historically, they were rarely fully separated. The witch tending herbs by the kitchen door was often the same person paying attention to their dreams. The woman hanging rosemary in the home was also the one whispering prayers over the threshold. The person growing mugwort for sleep and visions was often also the one deeply connected to ancestor work, moon cycles, and spirit communication. The physical world and the spiritual world flowed together, I think, much more naturally in older folk practices. And our ancestors thrived, I think, with the two working just hand in hand. A lot of old world witchcraft was incredibly practical and cozy. It smelled like drying herbs hanging from wooden beams, like lavender tucked into linens, and like mint growing wildly near kitchen paths, or like smoke even, like smoke from the hearth drifting through the evening air. Oh, I love that smell, don't you? There's something just deeply comforting about that kind of magic. And plants became part of spiritual practice because they naturally hold both physical and symbolic energy at the same time. Rosemary became connected to remembrance, purification, protection, and ancestral energy. I know I mentioned rosemary a lot, but rosemary feels like one of those plants that almost every witch eventually develops a relationship with. It's protective, grounding, strong, resilient. It has this beautiful old world feeling to it. Lavender carries softer energy, right? Peace, calm, sleep, emotional soothing. It's a gentle cleansing. And it's one of those plants that just changes the atmosphere of a room almost immediately. Mugwort is one of the most famous examples in hedgework. Historically, it became strongly associated with dreams, intuition, moonwork, spirit connection, and protective travel magic. People tucked it into pillows, brewed it into teas, and carefully and respectfully hung it above beds and carried it during spiritual work. And since we are talking about mugwort, or muggy mug, let's quickly talk about it in the plant form because it really does carry a bunch of old energy around it. It feels ancient, feels wild, like something growing quietly at the edge of a forgotten path while the rest of the world just rushes past it without even noticing. And maybe that's part of why hedge witches have been drawn to it for so long. Hedge work itself is about thresholds, the spaces between worlds and thoughts, between waking and dreaming and the ordinary and spiritual. And mugwort has long been associated with exactly those spaces. Our ancestors used mugwort for protection, dreaming, intuition, spirit work, and divination. Travelers used to carry it for safety on long journeys. It was hung over doorways to ward off negativity. It was burned during ritual work and tucked into pillows to encourage vivid dreams and deeper spiritual insight. In many folk traditions, mugwort became known as one of the great witch herbs because of its strong connection to intuition and altered states of awareness. If you sit with the plant for a little while, you can see it. You can understand why. It has a very earthy, moonlit feeling to it. Mugwort just feels misty, like twilight in plant form. If rosemary feels, bright and sharp and protective, well, then mugwort feels soft and deep and inward, more reflective. I think this is why it shows up so often in conversations about dream work and hedge crossings. Many witches throughout history believed mugwort helped thin the veil just enough to strengthen intuition and spiritual awareness. Not in some, big dramatic movie style way, but in a subtle way, really internal and reflective. The kind of energy that encourages listening and observing instead of controlling. Now, practically speaking, modern witches still work with mugwort in a lot of different ways. I personally place it near my bed for dream work. I use it in tea rituals, and I know many of us use it in meditation sessions. I add it to protective bundles and spell jars and moon rituals and some of my smoke cleansing practices. I think some of us simply grow it in the garden and spend time sitting near it as part of our connection to plant energy itself. But mugwort is a real herb with real physical properties. Like any plant ally, right? It deserves respect and common sense. Some people are sensitive or even allergic to it, especially if you have ragweed allergies. Mugwort is certainly avoided during pregnancy, so, be responsible. Part of witchcraft is remembering that working with herbs means honoring both their spiritual symbolism and their physical reality. But that's part of the balance, right? That's part of it too. Real witchcraft has always lived in the practical world, and mugwort carries that old wisdom beautifully. Now, I do have mugwort growing in my backyard, so I want to add an important note here, especially for those of us with pets and backyard chickens or animals around our homes. Even though mugwort carries beautiful spiritual symbolism in witchcraft, it still needs to be approached thoughtfully and responsibly because it can potentially cause issues for some animals if consumed in larger amounts. Our animals have very sensitive respiratory systems when it comes to strong herbs and smoke, so we need to be careful. But again, that's part of it too, right? Caring not only for the plants themselves, but for every living thing sharing space around them. Now, my pets do not seem interested in the mugwort plants that I have in the yard. The chickens don't peck at it at all, and my cats don't pay much attention to it. When I had my German Shepherd, he didn't pay much attention to it either. Now, for my chickens, they do look at everything. I know mint grows like crazy, but they love eating it. So I have a hard time growing mint because they eat it all. They look at every plant as an option, but they do not eat the mugwort. I don't know what your pets will do, but mine are not too interested in it. Anyways, just be careful. Be mindful of who is sharing your backyard space with you and your plants. Anyways, back to working with plant and hedge witchcraft together. I think witches have been creating sacred spaces with plants for centuries without necessarily calling them sacred spaces. Like a doorway with protective herbs hanging nearby, a kitchen windowsill lined with plants, bundles drying from hooks, garden paths intentionally planted, flowers grown for the dead, herbs planted near gates and thresholds, especially thresholds. Thresholds are incredibly important in hedge witchcraft because they represent crossing points between spaces, between outside and inside, public and private, or even safe and unknown. And because of that, many old traditions placed protective plants near doors and windowsills. And we also have garlic in pantries, don't we? Like dried flowers near hearths. Not because we're trying to create Pinterest perfect witch houses, but because the home itself is viewed as spiritually alive, protected and cared for, blessed, really. I think modern witches reconnect with this energy in very simple ways. And that's enough. We are hungry for spaces that feel alive and intentional, aren't we? We want the grounded, sacred, comforting home. Plant and hedge witchcraft together reminds us that magic happens in the garden, at twilight, and in the kitchen while tea is steeping. It happens at the doorway while herbs dry overhead, and also at the fire pit under the moon, in all of the wonderfully witchy little rituals that slowly make a house feel like a living spiritual home. Of course, we have to talk about the business witch side of this because plant and hedge witchcraft are some of the most practical forms of magic in the modern working lives that we have, especially for those of us spending our days inside offices and staring at screens and juggling deadlines, emails, meetings, stress, notifications, and constant mental noise. One of the biggest things plant and hedge work teaches us is how to regulate our energy. And wow, do we need that in the modern work culture? Something as simple as a desk plant can completely shift the feeling of a workspace. Not because it's some giant magical spell necessarily, but because living things change energy. They soften sterile environments and they reconnect us to growth, to breath, care, and life. A little rosemary plant on a desk, a pothos trailing beside a computer, lavender nearby, or mint in the office kitchen, even a tiny little succulent sitting beside your planner. Those little touches matter, and they matter more than people probably realize. They remind us that we are still human inside productivity culture. And herbal teas, they become a huge piece of this too. I swear, sometimes making tea is one of the most accessible, magical acts available to us during stressful workdays. Chamomile for calming the nervous system, especially after a difficult meeting. Peppermint for mental clarity and refreshment. Lavender for emotional softness. Rose for self compassion during burnout. Rosemary for focus and grounding before tackling a hard project. The act itself becomes ritual, doesn't it? Boiling water, steeping herbs, pausing for 5 minutes, just breathing and returning to yourself. That pause can become a type of little hedge crossing moment all by itself, a transition of sorts, a boundary and a reset for sure. I think hedge witchcraft gives us an incredibly important lesson for the corporate world. Not every boundary needs to be a wall. Sometimes the healthiest boundaries are hedges, living boundaries, flexible ones really, but intentional nonetheless. A hedge protects while still allowing life to move and breathe. And emotionally, that's such a powerful image for our modern workspaces because we need them. Energetic boundaries at work are essential. Something to help us not carry everyone's stress home, not let every email invade our nervous system, not give every piece of yourself away to productivity, not staying emotionally on, like on, 24 hours a day. We need transitions, healthy transitions. And older cultures understood transition rituals better than we do now. Or I don't know, I think they did. Historically, people often had physical transitions between spaces, right? Leaving fields, crossing gates, walking paths home, washing hands before entering the house, or changing clothes after labor, lighting evening fires, preparing meals at dusk. I don't know, I think our modern life just skips so much of that. And now we close a laptop and somehow expect our nervous system to instantly become peaceful 5 seconds later. Our bodies don't work that way. Mine doesn't. So creating little transition rituals can become deeply healing and really a type of hedge magic for us modern witches. And we still can do a bunch of that. Just tweak it a little bit, right? How about changing clothes after work? Washing your hands intentionally? Lighting a candle at dusk? Watering plants before dinner? Taking short walks around the block? Or just, I don't know, sitting outside. Just sit outside for 10 minutes before entering home mode. Maybe for you, it's going to be making tea before answering personal messages or just listening to birds instead of notifications for just a couple minutes. Those tiny rituals help us cross the hedge between work life and personal life. And really, burnout, it's just a sign that we've become disconnected from natural rhythms entirely. And plant and hedge witchcraft can pull us back towards balance again, back to cycles, breath, and seasonality, back to rest and observation. I think that's why so many business witches are drawn to these paths that we are walking right now, because they offer something modern work culture doesn't: permission to remain spiritually connected while still functioning in the real world. You do not have to abandon ambition to stay magical. I'm not going to. You don't have to quit your career to reconnect with nature. I'm not going to do that. You don't have to move into the woods to become spiritually grounded. Well, that one I might do. So it starts with one plant on your desk, one cup of tea, one deep breath at sunset, or I don't know, one intentional boundary to protect your peace. Plant and hedge witchcraft really does connect beautifully back to our potion party episode from last week. Because what we are really talking about in both conversations is relationship. When we talked about potions, we talked about how magic isn't always giant dramatic movie scenes with glowing bottles and smoke pouring out of a cauldron. Sometimes it's tea. Sometimes it's herbs hanging in the kitchen. Sometimes it's honey and warm water after a hard day. And sometimes it's the rosemary plant sitting by the front door that you touch every single morning before work without even realizing you're creating a ritual around it. And plant and hedge witchcraft takes that one step deeper. Because now we start looking at the living world itself as part of the relationship. Not just what a plant does for us, but how we connect to it, how we care for it, how we notice and sit with it, how we allow nature to become part of our spiritual rhythm again instead of something we only pass by on the way to the parking lot. And I guess that's really the thread that's running through all of my recent episodes lately. Moon water, potions, slowing down, reconnecting, creating intention inside ordinary life again. Many of us balancing work, family, stress, deadlines, exhaustion, responsibilities, the constant movement of modern life are craving that connection right now. We're craving grounding in something real. Witches have always found magic in our kitchens and gardens, in forests and doorways, in moon water jars and bundles of drying herbs hanging near the stove, because they reconnect us to the living world again. Today's episode stirred something in you. If it made you want to plant herbs, walk slower outside, learn the names of the plants growing near your home, create protective spaces around your doorway, brew tea with intention, or I don't know, simply spend a little more time listening to the world around you, then maybe the magic is already working. I do have a poem for you and the moon update, of course, for this week. I'm going to go grab those notes and I'll be right back. Okay, I've got the poem, and it goes. By root and rain, by leaf and thorn, by quiet fields at early morn, I walk the hedge where worlds grow thin, with soil below and stars within. Through garden gate and woodland old, where whispered stories still are told, I gather peace from branch and bloom, and light small fires against the gloom. The fresh rosemary beside my door, the lavender upon the floor, the mugwort drying by the flame, each living thing remembers names. The hedge is not a place of fear, but where the unseen lingers near. A winding path of root and breeze, of creaking gates and talking trees. And plant by plant, day by day, the living earth will show the way, not through perfection, power, or haste, but sacred moments slowly traced. So here I stand, with dirt-stained hands, still learning nature's older plans. A witch beside the wildwood seam, half in this world, half in the dream. Well, right now, as this airs on Wednesday, June 3rd, we still see much of the big, full blue moon from the 31st glowing up there above us. But she is, in fact, starting to wane. This phase is actually called the waning gibbous moon, and what that means for us right now is integration. This is kind of like the exhale after the big, energetic inhale of the full moon. The full moon tends to bring things to the surface, doesn't it? Emotions, realizations, energy, inspiration. Sometimes exhaustion, too, if we are being honest, especially after a really powerful moon like the one we just had. And now, well, now we start processing it all. We start sorting through what actually matters. The waning gibbous moon is wise energy, a reflective energy, really. It asks us to start slowing down and absorbing what we've learned instead of immediately racing towards something new or just the next thing, which fits perfectly with today's episode, really. Plant and Hedge Witchcraft asks us to slow down too, to notice, reconnect, and observe the world all around us instead of forcing ourselves to constantly produce, push, hustle, and move. The waning gibbous moon phase is beautiful for journaling, dream work, tea rituals, garden walks, gratitude work, cleansing your space, and just, I don't know, maybe pulling back your energy a little bit and resting your nervous system. It's a good time for listening instead of chasing, and it's a wonderful time for sitting quietly with plants and nature. Even just stepping outside for a few minutes and letting your feet touch the earth again can feel incredibly healing under this moon. Okay, next week. Next week will be the episode on solar magic and working with our masculine energy. I promise I'm going to make it work. I promise to work really hard on getting my thoughts organized enough so I hopefully produce a good episode for this podcast. Till then, Happy, happy June. I hope the rest of your week is just amazing and you have an amazingly wonderful weekend. I will talk with you next week. Thank you for joining me today at Witchy Work Wishes, a place to find your weekly inspiration for bringing your personal witchcraft practice into your business, work, and office. For more information and additional content, please visit me online at witchyworkwishes.com. If you want to send me a personal note, please email me at info@witchyworkwishes.com. And of course, you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Just search for Witchy Work Wishes.